Welcome to the Global Citizenship Education interview series, where we engage visionary thinkers and transformative educators in conversations that matter. And today we are delighted to be joined by Simon Kavanagh, an educator and learning designer whose work bridges art, innovation, and global learning. From his early days in Dublin to his pioneering role at Kaospilot and the creation of the Learning Arches framework, Simon has transformed how we think about education as a time-based art form that nurtures creativity, ownership, and character. His methods have reached educators worldwide and inspired a generation to see learning as both a personal journey and a civic responsibility. Simon, welcome to the Global Citizenship Education interview series. It is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Very nice to meet you.
It is a pleasure. And one of the aspects that is really interesting to me about our conversation today is we are touching upon a mix of art and creativity, civic responsibility, areas that really are needed in this discussion on global education, global citizenship, and beyond. So, the first question I want to ask you really is on the theme of art, citizenship, and your journey as a creative educator. Your journey from art and design to global education is, at least based on what I've been reading about your profile and important work you're doing, remarkable. And so the question is, how did your creative background shape your understanding of learning as a civic and ethical act, one that prepares individuals to participate meaningfully in a complex and interconnected world? Although, to be honest, I prefer to use the word planet rather than world because it's more embracing of humans and non-humans. In any case, the question is challenging enough, so
Yeah,
I'm curious to learn your response.
yeah. I like the idea of planet rather than world. That's good. Well, I guess I mean, just recently I was reflecting on my origins as a teacher, and it started when I joined art college in Dublin, the National College of Art and Design um, when I was 17, so that's quite a while away. And I'd already decided that my career was going to be a teacher. I mean, I was called to teaching. And then my love for art. And then when those combined, I really believed back then when I was young and a little bit more naive that art could save the world. And I felt that if art was taught correctly and really allowed young people to find confidence, shift their perspectives, to create their worldview, see the beauty behind art and the process of innovation and creativity, that it really could save the world. So that's the way I was already thinking as a teacher, a young teacher at 18, 19, 20. And I already realized back then that sometimes you have to break the academic rules to make it relevant and contextual to the people I was working with. So already at an early age, I was choosing the increased challenge of a young teacher to work in social, economically challenged areas of Dublin, where art was not deemed in any way important for these people who were just wanted to get work and jobs. So I had to find this balance of really meeting them where they're at, making it contextually useful, giving them confidence in expressing themselves around themes that were relevant to them. And it worked really well. So my early experiments really gave me confidence to continue. Um, and then I had a pause of teaching between for a few years working in multimedia consulting and as creative director, and then in Paris. And then when the sort of dot bomb happened and all the media, multimedia world collapsed, I decided I wanted to go back into teaching. So I went straight back into teaching, focusing on art again and media art in Paris, and then got hired to run a faculty of visual communication in Shanghai for 2.5 years for a British university. And when I went there, it was a chance to revisit again how to contextualize and make relevant and meaningful Western art to an Asian population. So I've always been tapping into this balance between creativity, development, confidence building, innovation, problem solving, but always within the civic or the social context that we were based.
I believe that in connection to what you're saying at the moment, there are a couple of interconnected questions I want to ask, but on the Kaospilot code and the learning arches. But before I do that, for the sake of clarity, let's work on a couple of definitions. So, for our audience, particularly educators, intellectuals, researchers, practitioners, what is the Chaos Pilot code and what is the Learning Arches framework? And then I will ask a question, follow-up question on this.
Okay, to talk about Chaos Pilot code and the Learning Arch method framework, I sort of have to go back a little bit because when I was running the faculty in Shanghai, I realized still that the educational system was still not trying to contribute to the level of ambition and personal development and growth that I thought education, design, and art school education could deliver. So I started reaching out because I was really needing a pedagogical breakthrough for myself to find a methodology that would support me to teach the way I was teaching and having huge success with. And in those days, I guess it was called alternative learning, but it was a very emergent concept back then. So this was already 20 years ago. And then I reached out to Chaos Pilots and I came across the Chaos Pilots and I got offered a job here. And I came to find that pedagogical breakthrough. I came here for 2 years to explore that, and I've been here 19. So I think I found it. And the idea then is that when I came, I wasn't trained here as a Chaos Pilot. And Chaos Pilot was already 15 years old. So we're 35 years old next year. And they were already building on an incredible alternative democratic side of education, which was very normal for Denmark. Even going back to Grundtvig, hundreds of years ago, this idea of democracy, self-driven, personal development, growth, autonomy, this is at the root of all Danish education. So Chaos Pilot built on this and combined some chaos methodology and other principles of systemics along the way. So when I came to the school, nothing could have prepared me for this. So I had to understand and find a method to turn all the tacit knowledge and culture and principles and values into an educational journey. So that when I became head of studies and I had to create a new curriculum, I had to actually define everything that was happening here on skills, knowledge, attitudes, mindset, behavioral principles, everything. And as a visual person, the only way that I could really understand the learning journey that students went on was to visualize it. And when I started visualizing it, that's when the learning arch methodology actually came to life. And then when I realized I had basically, decoded the chaos and found the first sort of glimpses of what the learning journey, the transformational learning journey that the students here go on, I then decided to open source it and share it to the world. And that was the concept. And since then, like 13, 14 years ago when we started this, we've trained over 8,000 educators all over the world in this methodology now.
The Learning Arches methodology.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so if I had to ask you to define in one sentence the Learning Arches methodology, what wording would you use? Just for the sake of clarity, and then I have a follow-up question on this.
Yeah. The learning arch methodology is bottom line, it's a visualization of time. So you work with whatever time frame your education or your program is, you draft it based on time. And the concept is that when you visualize the time, you don't have more time or less time, but the method allows you to innovate within the time frame you have. And the concept is we also have to arch the time in between your lectures or your sessions or your classes or your workshops because they're equally as important as the sessions themselves. So I use the methodology like of a person playing the piano, that the pauses and the space between each note is equally as important. And when you see learning like this, then it's not about having micro sessions. It's about actually finding ways to connect these across a learning journey where we're trying to get really good at creating clarity around deliverables and expectations, learning styles, the concept of performance, the role of the educators, what it means to take that education. And the better we are at setting this learning space, the sooner I can get off as a teacher and then hold the space, which is the arch. I can hold that space and then really focus on iterative learning, iterative evaluations and feedback, seeing what's what's triggering the learners, challenge my own biases and assumptions that I had when I designed the learning, giving them much more autonomy and ownership, and then really focusing on how to land the learning in terms of not only summative but also authentic. And when we talk about authentic learning, it's this idea of how do we map and track the intra and interpersonal development of the learners, but also how do we react on what we're learning real time instead of waiting to the end of a course or program when it's too late to actually change and adapt it. So like it's an iterative type of learning, and the bottom line is it's based on this idea of how little structure is enough just to give us the confidence to hold the space, teach less, host more, and give more autonomy to the learner's own learning journey.
Absolutely. And learners' autonomy is definitely an interesting field and theme. There is a lot of research going on this, also in relation to global citizenship education. I want to ask you a key question. Learning as a time-based art form. This is very interesting to me. So you describe learning as a time-based art form, which, in my opinion, beautifully reframes how we think about teaching and learning. And could you explain how this artistic and I would say temporal vision, quite new to me, I must say, and I've been interviewing quite a big number of educators. So, how this artistic and temporal vision can help educators design learning experiences that cultivate empathy, reflection, agency, responsibility. Some of my guests here would use the word co-creating the teaching and learning journey. So, how this approach can help educators in design such learning experiences?
Yeah, so I only really uncovered the sort of it was like the aha moment of that what if learning is an art time what if learning is a time-based art form. And I was actually watching a video, a TED talk not so long ago, an old video, the turn of the century, where Malcolm McLuhan, one of my favorite early video artists and person really playing with time lapsing, talked about the concept of film and animation being a time-based art form. And what they did was, and we can share this video afterwards to the listeners, but what he did was he showed the concept of when you throw a ball and that ball bounces. And the harder you throw that ball, the bigger the arches. And what he did was he tracked in graphics, in lines, the actual arches. And when I saw this, I started realizing that actually that is, I'd already developed the learning arch methodology. And when I saw, this video, I went, arches are the same thing. It is a time-based art form. And the whole concept, what he was talking about then, which was this idea of the spaces and the time between the frames of an animation is equally as important as the actual frame or the character or the animation itself. Then I realized, what if, and then I realized actually we've been undervaluing teachers for 400 years, if not more. And definitely in the last 20, 30 years, when we now know how important educators are for this civic responsibility, for this ability for people to find their own worldview, their meaning, their values, their mandates, their ethics. The idea was that we have to elevate educators to artists, to scientists, to musicians, to
Mm.
dancers, to music creators, because that's really what they're doing, as opposed to some sort of, public sector worker, which is how they're seen in a lot of the world. If we then elevate that and actually build on the confidence they already have, and just give them enough structure, like the frames, the music bars, whatever it is, the coding or the common language, to actually create and see what they already do really well. It can just build the confidence then to be more emergent, to be more transparent, to have more dialogue with the students, to be adaptive to what's emerging and in terms of the learner's needs, what's relevant to their context, their age group, their demography. So actually what it does is it gives just enough framing of the art piece, but allows you to, with major like micro landing moments, to actually iterate, to adapt, to see what's in service of the students, what's exciting them, what's their knowledge gaps, um, what's happening in their lives that we can work with. What are they expected to do when they leave education in terms of tasks and responsibilities in companies or in the public sector or in the social sector? How can we already bring in these needs 5, 10 years from now into the space? And one of my biggest things with education is I can't understand how, in a time where we should be encouraging students to fail and take major risk when the cost of failure is so low, except for academic, of course, we don't have to focus on that. So when they leave and the cost of failure is so high, we expect them then to take risk. And it's a huge disparity in education. And what learning arches do is it creates that structure where that meets skills and knowledge. It blends and reacts and supports the academic importance and learning styles and so on, but brings to life equally values, mindsets, attitudes, and behaviors. It works with major moments of reflection and evaluation, but not just on a summative and a knowledge level. It's also about talking about skills gaps. It's also talking about your personal ambition to be a catalyst, to be a change maker, whatever it is. And the idea is if you do this, you can still have multiple tracks for different levels of ambition within one classroom. And the
Yeah.
whole idea then is like how little structure can liberate us just to have more creativity, more emergence, more ownership, more collaboration, as your previous speakers talked about. And that's all it is. It's just framing that. And then what I've
Interesting.
also noticed, a lot of educators are doing this work. They're doing it based on intuition. The problem is they don't have a methodology to understand why it works, how it works, and more importantly, how to be more transparent with their students, but also with their colleagues.
Yeah. It's always a
And that's
teamwork, right?
absolutely. You
Collaborating
might,
with colleagues and different
yeah,
values and mindsets, and that's probably the one of the most challenging areas in the teaching and learning process. And you mentioned risk. So the next question I want to ask you is about risk,
mm,
creativity, and also ethical imagination. So your framework calls on educators to increase the bandwidth for creativity, innovation, engagement, and risk. And so, for example, in the context of global citizenship education, where dialogue and ethics are central, how can we encourage learners to embrace risk and uncertainty as pathways to deeper human understanding and social
mm,
transformation? I know that
mm.
this is a challenging question, but
Okay.
since we are discussing this, I think it's important to develop on this.
Yeah. So another thing when we work with the learning arches is that we have to speak to an ambition and a capacity in our learners that we don't currently see. So when we design the learning, we have to speak to a high level of ambition that we don't currently see in our students. The opposite of that is our students could never do this. Well, then we're never going to change the empowerment and increase the trust that we need to have in our students as incredible human beings. And if we speak to the higher level ambition and capacity, then we have to trust that the learning journey that's adapting real time will actually lead us to this higher level of ambition and capacity. But also with that higher level, over the course of the learning journey or the time frame, complexity has to increase, challenge has to increase. So when we are setting the skills and the knowledge and the learning, it's very, very important that we set tasks and activities that allow the learners to practice the skills, apply the knowledge, and embody the values, mindsets, or attitudes. If the tasks do not bring the students that level of risk taking that can hold a space between frustration and breakthrough, then we can't ask them to land and reflect on something that hasn't been meaningful or where they haven't felt challenged or moved. And that's okay. Some education just doesn't want to go there and they want to stay academic and they want to work with the classic way of theory before practice, if there's any practice. But we then have to, we should really be balancing theory and practice and reflection. And students and learners of all ages will reflect as long as what they're reflecting on is worthy of that reflection. So it has to be something that they have felt or moved. It could be based on understanding their interpersonal, how their actions impact other people for good or for bad, how they're working with their own self-determination or rigor or motivation, all these things. But if we don't ask them, if we don't challenge them, then and potentially to hold that space between frustration and breakthrough and the potential safe space for failure and risk, then they're not going to learn about it. When we land, we're always landing on what have they learned as an individual, what have they learned as an individual in the group, and what Kaospilot is really famous for, and what we really unlocked is the team pedagogy. It's what the whole team can learn when all the groups, some succeeded and some failed, are sharing what worked towards and against. So the whole team learn. So the ones who really succeeded learn from those who failed, and the ones who failed learn from those who succeeded. And then we're also landing on very inspired by social constructivism, this idea
Mhm.
of how do we work with others? How do we co-create meaning? How do we help our learners build their lifelong learning philosophy, but also their own worldview? So this
Absolutely.
is what we're doing continuously while the complexity is continuously increasing, where we're actually revisiting primary skills like leadership or collaboration or communication and empathy and all the soft skills that are involved. We're revisiting them again and again when the complexity and the context and the consequence is increasing. And that's
Absolutely.
pretty much what Kaospilot does.
And in connection to this, I want to ask you another important question. Learning for a planet, indeed, in transition. So you have worked with schools, universities, and organizations across continents. So from that global perspective, which, by the way, I want to remind to ourselves and my audience, our audience here, that there is no global education without the local. But let's talk about a global perspective in the sense of a all-embracing, holistically embracing perspective. What do you think are the most urgent shifts education must make, particularly global citizenship education, because this is the Global Citizenship Education interview series, must make to prepare citizens not only to adapt to change, but to actively and ethically shape the future of our shared planet. I'm asking this because one of the core discussions around the notion of global education, global citizenship is engagement and active engagement, agency. And so that's why I'm asking you this question. Is a core element of this discussion.
Whew, yeah, so where should I start? I think, first of all, I think the first realization is local before global. And that means we need to remind universities and educations that they have a responsibility to empower and support and improve their local surroundings. That is what universities should stand for. And there's so much scope and range for students, almost like an army, to do systemic work, social work, problem solving,
Yeah,
complex problem solving, prototype as participants in that area. And that's wonderful. We also have to be aware of, though, that it's amazing. It's one thing to apply your skills and knowledge and risk in your own local environment. It's a whole different thing to try and do that in a completely alien context where there's completely different culture and social needs, equality, everything. So, how do we then balance to build a support and confidence and agency on a local level, but then also support them whilst they're learners on the global level so they can go and try out their work, their methodology, their personal growth, their mandate, their ethics, whatever it might be, their practice, but in global environments. How do we then, and then in order to do that, we need to train them to basically to navigate in complexity, in emergence, to spot patterns and trends, to have a deep systemic understanding of cause and effect of all these things. And we're just not doing that. We're just not giving the learners the methods to really step onto a higher level and actually solve problems on a systemic level.
Yeah,
And this very much comes down to then figuring out that if we only give students complicated problems, there's going to be one solution. If you give them complex challenges, then there's many, many, many ideas, solutions, ways to work, and so on. And we
absolutely.
just have to train them to stay in that. And I'm glad you mentioned agency because the whole concept of personal agency is so important, or what we call three P agency is personal, practical, and professional. So when we're learning all the way through, we're always measuring what am I learning on a personal level, on a practical level, and professional level. And when we break down agency, it's like this iterative learning style. We talk about three things. We talk about the ability to grow your craft, your character, and your confidence. And that can only continue to grow if the complexity and the challenges we're giving students are more complex, more meaningful, have social benefits that can actually empower the people who will implement it, right? It's a whole different way of working and solving problems. Um,
Absolutely.
so the global, and then the concept then I really like here is that yes, we are training global citizens. Absolutely. I mean, there's some parts of where we're working now, like in Asia and India, the countries that used to follow the UK or the US model, they realize where they lead. And they're going like, hold on, why would we continue this way? And also, like India and some parts of Asia, they're the first generations that are really seeing themselves as global citizens. So we have to completely shift the way that we're training young people and giving them this
Absolutely.
worldview and this sense of personal agency. And also lifelong learning. I mean, if you only have students for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you can only do so much. But what we believe is when you set this higher level arch that might not land for 10 more years, how do you use the time you have with the students to set that higher lifelong learning philosophy
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and train them for that continuous evaluation, reflection, self-direction, all these sort of things. So
Absolutely. And
yeah.
so we discussed the Chaos Pilot code, the origins of the learning arches framework. We discussed teaching and learning, learning particularly as time-based art form. We touched upon risk, creativity, and ethical imagination. Just now, the importance of shaping, developing global citizens in an ethical way based on this urgent need for agency in our super complex
Mm.
societies. And I'm using societies in the plural on purpose because I appreciate the wonderful diversity we have. Now, I want to ask you a final question. I know it's a challenging one, but at the same time, a very important one. And the question is, if you were to define global citizenship education, educating for global citizenship, in just three keywords, which would you choose and why?
I think there's something here. So it's I'll do my best to keep it to one word. There might be two words with a hyphen. One thing I really believe in, and one of the strongest things I support all teachers to do is just context before content.
Context
So
before content. Interesting.
yes, the idea is that if you create the context for what they're about to learn in terms of the skills and the theory, then if you create that context first, then even like the 60% of the people in the class who want to learn better with their hands will now be more aligned and ready to understand why the theory is useful, powerful, and relevant. It's like the teaser before you give the answer. It's so important to work with this, especially if that context is a deep social challenge, community, whatever that might be. And then the building on, so that's context before content. The other one is that it needs to be empowering.
Empowering.
And what I mean by empowering is that we need to empower people. We don't need to give them the answers. We need to empower them to solve the challenges themselves within their context, to have ownership of the solution, So empowering, and so it's empowering our learners to empower others, but not to give the answer and the solution because we don't know it. No one knows them. They're so complex. And then the second one for me, it has to be value driven or meaning driven. So
Meaning
what we
driven and value
do,
driven.
yes, it must be value and meaning driven to support the learners to see the sustainable value that might be created. It must be meaningful for them and for the people that they're working with. So it's context before content, sort of empowering, which is so important, and then this value-driven learning, or definitely meaning and relevance to the learners.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Simon Kavanagh is the creator of the Learning Arches framework, working on pioneeristic education with the Kaospilot and working with several educators worldwide on shaping a more ethical planet, I would say, right? We can say that. Risk,
Mm.
creativity, ethical imagination, all themes that are very much relevant to this discussion on global citizenship education. Thank you for joining the Global Citizenship Education interview series. A real pleasure.
Thank you, Emiliano.